Hey, it's Brock here with Rock Hill Farms, and today I want to talk about lift capacity and rated operating capacity on tractors and skid steers and other types of equipment. Now, if you've ever went to buy a piece of equipment, then you probably know that these numbers can be confusing, and often the number that you are given doesn't really mean anything relative to something that I can understand, or that it's not the number I need to decide if that machine can do the work that I need it to do. For instance, I'm sitting on a mini skid steer that just showed up at the property yesterday. And I spent a lot of time trying to decide if this was the right machine for me. And it's sitting here on my property, and I still don't know if it can do one of the main jobs I need it to do. I want this machine to be able to move full baskets of firewood that weigh around 1,500 pounds. And the rated operating capacity of this machine is less than 1,500 pounds, but I think it can move them. As far as that specific question, I'll find out in the next couple days, and I'll show that in a video. But mainly, I want to start off focusing with a compact tractor or any tractor. And the first thing we need to do is try to understand what numbers we are given and what those numbers mean, and then how that relates to a number that matters to me. So when you look up a machine and you want one answer, a simple answer, you Google, you type in tractor model number lift capacity, it will give you one number. And that number typically means how much it can lift to full height at the pins, which is a number that doesn't mean anything. The only value you can take from that is that all manufacturers use that same system, so you can compare. This model number is listed to lift 200 pounds more than that one, and extrapolate that to what it can actually carry. But the problem with that, in terms of practicality, is I try not to ever lift a load to full height and move. You might lift for a second for a reason, but so this tractor right here, we'll start with this. It says lift capacity 1,120 pounds. But I've lifted 1,500 pounds off of a trailer, a semi-truck before. I lift those 1,500 pound totes all the time. It can lift 1,700 pounds an inch off the ground. So why are we not told that number? And in fairness to the manufacturers, that's a hard number to give because it still depends on variables. How far out is the center of your weight? Things like that. How heavy is your pallet fork frame? So it would be really difficult for them to give us the number we need. But the most helpful information right now is there any way that we can find that out? And there's a pretty good way to get close. So as I mentioned earlier, the lift capacity we are primarily given is if we go to full height, which we're at right now, and then we come to this pin, how much weight could you lift right here all the way up? And nobody ever tries to do that, really. I guess hypothetically, like if you're trying to pull a stump out or something, there's a scenario where you hook a chain right there, but really there's not even anything to hook to right there. So it's not a useful number. Some manufacturers will give you a number on their website that is 500 millimeters out from this point, which I believe is 19 inches. But if you come out 500 millimeters and then see what you can lift to full height, my machine goes from 1,100 down to 800 pounds. So the exact number is 803 divided by 1,120 means I can lift 72% as much weight if I'm that far out. And I'm going to keep that number in mind for our future conversation about this. So if I'm thinking about buying this machine, there's a list of things I know I need to do, and I use that to decide if this machine can handle the job I need to do. And that's, I need to do some brush cutting, I need to level out my driveway, I sometimes pick up firewood totes, I sometimes get freight delivered. I'd like to be able to pick up a pallet that weighs 1,300 pounds. That was my exact thought process when buying this machine. Now, there's some really smart, experienced people out there who will say, always just buy a bigger machine than you need. That's smart. It makes sense, but a couple caveats. Number one, a lot of us are spending every penny they can afford on this. There's a lot of people out there buying tractors they can't really afford, but they're going to do it anyway. And so saying buy a bigger machine, well, it's another $10,000. Like, it's not just that easy. And a secondary concern is that bigger machine may not do some other things you need it to do. I also want to mow my yard with this, or I like to pull it into this small shed that I have. Like, there are more considerations than just the size and lift capacity. So besides lift capacity, they tell us boom breakout force, 1,949 pounds. So that means we're setting on the ground and we need to just budget right at the pins, 1,949 pounds. So technically, I guess that would be your lift capacity. We've got a second number, breakout force, at 500 millimeters. So if your center of your weight is out here, what can you barely move off the ground? Well, that number is 1,360 pounds. So why am I telling you I can lift 1,700? Well, I actually upgraded to the mechanical self-leveling loader that has more lift capacity. That makes the conversation a little bit messy because I couldn't find the same numbers on the MSL. But what we know right now is that the breakout force at not 500 millimeters is 1,360 pounds. So if we're being realistic, what can I pick up? 1,360 pounds minus the weight of my fork frame, which is going to be like 1,200 pounds. So that is the best number I can find to extrapolate what this machine can actually carry. The next thing that I have to say at this point, just in case there's someone watching who doesn't already know, is at all times, you never want to lift anything heavy higher than you absolutely have to lift it. So if I can pick up 1,300 pounds, let's say, to waist height, driving with that at waist height is a good way to flip your machine over. Which is why skid steers and many skid steers don't give you a lift capacity. They give you a rated operating capacity, which is a function of how much weight does it take to tip the machine over. So now we've covered the machine that I already have. Now, let's talk about the machines I've been shopping for in larger tractors in the 40 to 60 horsepower range. And I know that I want to be able to lift 3,000 pounds is a minimum. If I get a new machine that can't lift 3,000 pounds, it's not solving any problems around here. I'd like it to be able to lift 4,000 pounds because I get big logs and I want to be able to carry those big logs. Anything over 4,000 pounds is probably too big for my mill. So I know how much I want to be able to pick up. But when I look at the specifications on tractors in that horsepower range, they won't lift enough. The lift capacities say 2,700 pounds, 2,800 pounds, and sounds like, well, shoot, I can't buy that size of tractor. It won't pick up enough. And that's why this video is supposed to be relevant, because I want to know if I can pick up these logs that I have here. I've got log weight calculators. I can know the weight of these logs. I need to know if buying that tractor will solve my log moving problem. So I've looked up a couple of tractors that I have personally driven or looked at and thought they could probably handle those logs. One example would be a TYM 574. I don't want to buy that machine and then find out if it can carry my logs or not. I know what the logs weigh. I know the rated lift capacity of the TYM 574 is 2,790 at full height at the pins. So it's a lot less out away from the pins, but it's a lot more down at ground level. So we're doing a math problem here. Breakout force at ground level, 5,316 pounds. That also doesn't tell me anything. That's at the pins. Earlier we found out that on my John Deere, it can handle 71% of the weight out 500 millimeters that it can up close. So if we take that breakout force of 5316 and take it times that 72, that tells me that it should be able to lift 2,800 pounds an inch off the ground out in front of the forks. So what can that tractor set on my sawmill? Probably 3,500 pounds. I wish there was a way to get that number from the manufacturer, but I understand why they can't give it to me. And to repeat something I've already said, I wouldn't want to use that tractor to lift 3,500 pounds 20 times a day, all day, every day. It's just lifting everything it can handle. That's not ideal. Get a bigger machine. But a bigger machine takes me from a hydrostat that I can afford to a utility tractor with a gear drive that I can't afford. And I'm not doing it every day all the time. So finding out that that tractor can occasionally set a log that big onto my sawmill is good information to have. And the way I would do that is to say it can probably pick up about 70% of its breakout force. So we talked about the fact that a tractor can lift much less as you go up. And that's probably a good thing, because if it could lift as much at full height as it could at ground level, you'd have a lot of people tipping their tractors over. So the fact that it works out that way is almost like an accidental safety feature. That does not happen with a skid steer. It's almost the same. In my experience and my understanding is that this machine can lift almost the same amount of weight through its full range of motion. Now, what happens is, if you lift your maximum lift capacity, you'll get up to a certain point and this machine will just tip over. So, kind of a scary deal. So, they don't tell you a lift capacity to full height. What they tell you is a rated operating weight. Now, for a skid steer with tires, they say, whatever it takes to tip the machine over, we're going to rate the operating capacity at 50%. So on this specific machine, tip rating is 7,300 pounds, I believe. 7,000, a little over 7,000 pounds. Breakout force at the pins is actually 8,750 or something like that. But tipping load on this machine is 7,000 pounds. So they rate it at 3,500 pounds on a wheel machine. On a track machine, they rate operating capacity at 35% of the tip load. So I have moved material that weighed 5,000, 6,000 pounds with this machine by being very cautious, very low to the ground, moving very slow. But it's actually rated for 2,500 pounds. So you need to have that understanding about the capability versus what's safe and the way it's rated. And I kind of think it makes sense to rate it this way. I almost wish the tractor would tell me that my tractor has a 1,700 pound lift capacity with a 900 pound rated operating capacity. But it is what it is, and the best we can do is try to understand how the numbers work. Now this little guy is interesting, and he's the hardest one to figure out what he can actually pick up. Because they put an 800 pound or 1,000. I've found two different numbers for the same machine. Now, I don't know how to differentiate, but I've seen either 800 pounds or 1,000 pounds as the rated operating capacity on this. But because it's so short and the weight is so compact, the change as the weight moves forward is so dramatically different that the breakout force at the front of the bucket is 1,700 pounds, but at the pins, it's like 4,000. So instead of 70%, you're getting like 30%. It's pretty wild. And the reason for that is the hydraulics on this are strong. The hydraulics on this could lift 4,000 pounds, which is great if you're digging with it or something. But for actually lifting, you don't have any counterbalance. There's not enough ballast. The machine's not long enough. If you had this 3,000 pound machine, but it was twice as long, then you could utilize that hydraulic power. But the way it is, every inch you move out, you dramatically lose what you can lift. And what's going to happen, I've seen it, is when you go to pick it up, the machine will just lift straight up, the back of the machine. So I've looked at all the numbers. I'm pretty sure I can move my totes, but it's going to be a day or two before I find that out for sure. All right, guys, I guess to sum this up, it's been long-winded. I've done a lot of talking, but I'm really trying to give you information that's helpful. And the reason I'm sharing this is because it's been on my mind, finding out how to tell what a machine can actually do before you buy it. So the best thing I can say is, if you have the opportunity to, just buy a bigger machine than you need, and you don't have any problems. But if that doesn't work out for you, you can look at a percentage of the breakout force as being a real amount that you can carry. And for a tractor, I'm thinking 70%. From looking at multiple model numbers, I'm thinking 70% of the breakout force is an amount you can lift just a couple inches and carry right at your limit. And then you've got another number that is what you can get to full height. And then say you need to get to waist height, you can do some estimation in there. And as long as you're not moving fast, turning, or on the side of a hill, then that's what you can carry. I appreciate you taking time to watch this video. I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.